All right. Hello, everyone. Today we have a super special, extra special guest with us. We have Dr. Aishat Aloba, and she comes to us from Lagos, Nigeria, but currently she's in California. She is a user experience researcher at Meta. She has a bachelor's in computer science from the University of Mississippi, as well as a master's and PhD in computer science and human centered computing, respectively, from the University of Florida. So, her work is on advancing product equity and responsible AI development. So, in her role, she focuses on making sure that products are built to meet the needs and motivations of diverse user populations, especially those from historically underserved communities. So, she's also interned in the past at Meta slash Facebook, as well as Infinite Energy. I had the pleasure of meeting Aisha when she was a PhD student at UF, and we definitely talked about a lot of Nigerian
Yes.
food and things like that. So, always a good time. So, I'm glad that we're able to reconnect today.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You only talked about food. That's
Yes.
all. Like, that's all.
Mostly. Well, grad school too, but
Grad
a
school
lot of
too, but
food.
like lots of food. Lots of food.
I feel like it's important to let everyone know Kyla is married to a Nigerian man, and
Yes.
so I guess it kind of makes sense
This
that
is very
food
important.
would be a topic of conversation.
Yeah. I think that's how we
Yes,
bonded.
definitely.
We bonded over that, like food, Nigerian
Yeah,
food.
it really was.
Did
Yes.
you teach her how to cook
Yeah.
anything, or was it just like
I think
these
I
are the
sent
different
I
tips?
sent I think I sent you a recipe at maybe or something at one point.
Yes,
Yes.
you sent me recipes. You sent me like she even went back and she brought some ingredients for recipes. So that was very awesome. We
Yes.
appreciate it because sometimes not everything is available here in
That's
That's
true.
Gainesville.
true. That's true.
That is so true.
Surprise, surprise.
So you were born and raised in Lagos.
Yes.
What was that like?
Yeah.
I think it was fun. I think like okay, I think like when people think of Africa, I would just say that like when people think of Africa, they think of like I don't know what they think about, but maybe they think about like some underdeveloped or developing thing or what they watch in the news, right? But like I feel like I grew up in a
Yeah.
city. Like Lagos is like the
Mm-hmm.
most populous city in Nigeria, probably in the whole of Africa, and it's like it has all the amenities that I would
Mm-hmm.
that it has here, like and like just living in Lagos is different because it's populous and but then it's fun. There's like a lot of like fun things to do,
Yeah.
fun people, and just the way of life is nice over there. So yeah,
Yeah. I
Isn't
was
there
gonna
like
say
a
there's
beach too?
beaches,
Or
there
there's
are
something?
like
little islands nearby.
lots of beaches.
Yeah.
There are like lots of it.
Yeah, one of
Yeah, that's not the
no.
narrative they give us.
One
That
of
is
my
not the
like really
narrative
good
they
friends
give.
in
That's true.
undergrad. She's from Lagos and like the I follow her on Instagram and I feel like she's one of the people who are in like one of the shows and like the reality shows about like young, rich and African or because like all of the stuff I
For
see, I'm
real.
like, oh my goodness, like this is very luxurious, very like elevated.
Yes, yes.
I want to go eat
yes.
there.
Yeah.
I want to go
There's
stay
a
in that
lot.
house. Beautiful.
Yeah, there's a lot of beautiful
Yeah,
stuff.
I'm
I
still
feel like
waiting for somebody to take me to visit.
Hint, hint.
yes.
Hint, hint. So, currently you're doing user experience research. So, when you were young, like, was this what you envisioned yourself doing? When you were growing up, like, could you see yourself here?
No, I think like I feel like every African but like Nigerian has the story whereby when you're young, right, as a Nigerian in a Nigerian home, right, you have a list of options that you should do. Like, like being a lawyer, accountant, engineer, doctor. Like, you have to like
Hmm.
it's really constrained. Now I think maybe things may be changing. I don't know. But like growing up that was like where kind of like how you think, right? Everybody was thinking that way. I want to be a doctor. I want to be an
Hmm.
engineer. So for me, initially, I was like, I wanted to be an accountant. But then my siblings would like make fun of me. They would be like, "Oh, you want to like, why do you want to be an accountant? You love money and all those things." And I'm like, okay. And then I'm like, why does it sound like you're like making fun of me a bit? So then I was like, okay, I'm no longer doing this. And so then my parents are engineers.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're both civil
Mm.
engineers. So I was like, okay, let me
Yeah.
think of something
Wow.
in the engineer.
Yeah, civil.
Yeah, so I was like, let me think of something in the engineering field. And like at that point, computers were a thing, right? So I was just like, oh, I'm gonna do
Mm.
computer engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Now, believe you me, I didn't know what that entailed. I just was like, I'm gonna do computer engineering, like put two plus two together. And so I had that at the back of
Mm-hmm.
my mind, like up until high school, and then high
Mm-hmm.
school, like I went to
Mm-hmm.
an only girls school, and I stayed in the boarding house. So there was a time we were going
Mm.
back to school, and then there was this poster on the wall that was like, oh, be a computer engineer in 2 weeks. And then I'm like, 2 weeks, like, oh, you can be a computer engineer in
What?
2 weeks. I'm like, oh no, I'm no longer interested in this. Like, I can be a computer.
You're like, it's not hard enough. What am I gonna do for the other 4 years
Yeah.
of college?
Exactly. But like now I know better that like the kind of computer engineering they were probably talking about was different. But this was me who just like put computer engineering together, and like if I'd done some research at that point, I would know that it's not the same. So I was like, oh, okay, I'm not gonna do this. But I'm like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. But then my sister had a friend who like just entered college back home, and it was like, oh, I'm taking computer science classes, and that's nice, you code and things like that. And it was explaining it, and I'm like, oh, that sounds like fun. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do computer science. And so then I feel like I knew a little still, but just like everybody asked, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna be a computer scientist, and that's all I tell people. But then I think when I first got introduced was when I first started college back home in Nigeria. And
Mm-hmm.
then like, yeah, programming was hard. I was like, what is going on here? But then I had like someone, like some mentors like tutor me, and then it became so much more fun. So yeah. But
Mm.
then
So you didn't have any exposure to computer science before you decided I'm going to be a computer
yeah,
scientist.
I did. I think I'd used the computer, but like to play games maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to
But
like
like nothing.
I want to bring up that you said that you went to an all girls boarding school, because I feel like that's fairly common in African countries, like where kids who are especially in the high school age will go into boarding schools. So can you kind of talk about what that was like?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I went to Queen's College. Shout out to my Queen's College girls. Like, it's a popular high school, secondary school. Let me call it. I would call it
Mm-hmm.
secondary school. So people are like, oh, she's Americanized.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Queen's College Secondary School.
Uh-oh.
Um, and so it's an all girls. Yeah, it's just because like high school, secondary school is like the old British versus American thing. So we like sometimes I call it high school when I'm talking to like here, but like if I'm talking to like my friends, it's like, oh, we went to Queen's College Secondary School. So being in a boarding house is interesting because you go at a young age. So I think I started high school, secondary school around 9 years
Wow.
old, going into like 10, on my way to
Wow.
10. But like I was so small, so like when I joined and I wanted to be in the boarding house, the principal was like, no, you look too small, you're not gonna be. But like
Oh,
mind you, some
no.
other people were there, but I think I was just so nervous doing the interview for the school that like I just like took a pen from my hands. I was using it, so she just felt like, oh, this person isn't ready for this yet. So then I
Oh,
joined in like, so in Nigeria, like it's like middle school is like JS 1 to 3, junior secondary 1 to junior secondary 3, and then there is senior secondary school 1 to senior secondary school 3, so that is high school. So this I was entering middle school, which is just 1. And so she was like, oh, maybe I should wait like till GS2, the second year, then I can try to like enter the boarding house. But people typically like send their kids to boarding because it's just like easier, like rather than like making your kid commutes every day. But it's also that sense of like like people your age are all in a place in like school.
Yeah.
Like you get to
Yeah.
make lifelong friends. Like like many of my close friends are people from that time because you sleep together, you eat together, you like do everything together, you go to class together, you read together, and it's just so much fun. So you remember a lot of your childhood with like these same people or similar people. So like boarding house in that regard is fun. There are of course some challenges with boarding house, like you still have sometimes the bullying challenge, and just like some things that like are just taken as like normal that are not necessarily like supposed to be the norm thing. Like the seniors may send the juniors to go do things, but like, at that point everybody's just like, oh, that's normal. Like, oh, if you're going to boarding house, you kind of expect at the back of
Yeah.
your head that like you, the junior one, will get sent by the senior ones to like maybe fetch water for them or like do some like little chores for them.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
some people take it a bit far, but I would say for the general people, it's like, oh, fetch water, like get the stuff for me and things like that. So, but then all
That's
that
like
you think of it as at that point,
older sibling
yeah, like
energy.
exactly older sibling energy,
Yeah.
but like older sibling energy, but like kind of like this older sibling you didn't ask for. Energy, like
And you didn't meet until last week.
exactly, like I didn't meet, or like so then you just sometimes you look back and you're just like, I could have done without that. But at the same time though, because you share those like experiences with the same group of people, it becomes something you reminisce with people. Like you reminisce those times and like, oh, can you remember when we had to do this? Like there are times when like the juniors will go first back to the dorm so you can sleep before the seniors come. And so then those times when we're like making noise,
Oh my
like you're
gosh.
making noise, and then the seniors come knock on you, come like just enter your door. Everybody pretends to sleep, and then the seniors literally come and
Oh my god.
they like fan your eyes to see if your eyelids
my
move.
God.
And once
Oh
your
my
eyelids,
goodness.
yeah. So then once your eyelids move, they're like, oh, okay,
That's
come
torture.
like come
Creepy.
do something. So then it's at
Oh
that
my
point it was
goodness.
things like you laugh about, right? Because everybody's
Yeah.
sharing that same scenario, and
Yeah.
you're looking at like new ideas on how to like evade like being sent. And at least for me, in my experience, it wasn't like often at all. It wasn't like often, I would say. Yeah, for mine, at least for my experience. And like at that point it was like fun times, like people still brag like, oh, I went to boarding house. Because in Nigeria you're like, oh, I went to boarding house, and that you've shared some like kind of experience that like if you didn't go to boarding house you may not
It's
have
like you
had.
pledged almost.
Exactly, like you have this kind of experience. So it was fun though. Like I did like the boarding house
Yeah.
when I was in the boarding house. Now I'm like, oh, would I send my kid to a boarding house? I'm not sure about that. I think
Well-
I think it's yeah.
You have like the issue of distance too in Nigeria, right? So like to get your children to school, the traffic in Lagos is like wild. Like it's worse than being in
Yes,
LA.
Yeah, the traffic is wild, and the traffic is wilder now. Growing up, the traffic was like not that. I would say like it's not that there wasn't traffic. It wasn't as crazy as now. Like growing up, you could still reasonably get your kids to school, but like most parents were like, at least many parents were like career or business. They were like working parents, so like it just felt like just
Yeah.
an easier way to like put your child in here. You come visit your children, and really many children wanted to go to boarding house also. Like it was like a thing. You're just like, I can't wait. Like that kind of like first step out of the house. I am no longer at home. Like I can go
Yeah.
into the world. Right, so it was that feeling of like, I'm
Yeah,
going into
I
the world
would've
and
loved
meeting.
that.
Yeah, like I feel like every time, like when I'm leaving home back to school, you feel like sad that, oh gosh, I'm leaving home, but you see it only lasts that day. From the next day, you're like, where were you
Yeah.
all at? What happened during your break? Tell me more. Like you're just like gisting and like having fun. So yeah, I like the experience. At
And that kind of
That's
kind of
really
prepares
cool.
you to go to college, right, in another country, right? Because
It
you're used to that.
does. Exactly. You're used to being like away. And I think that was why it was like interesting, like when I was in undergrad, like when like college freshmen come and they're like sometimes crying that they're leaving their parents and things, and I'm like, oh wow,
Yeah.
I did that like way longer ago. I am not like, of course, like coming to America, leaving your parents, you're still gonna cry anyways because like you're leaving them, but like you're used to that, like I am leaving you, and I'm like, oh, I will see you again soon. So yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about that transition, like leaving Nigeria to come to America to go to University of Mississippi.
all
like
places.
what all went into that? What all went into that decision? What was that like?
Yeah, so it's interesting, like like now I know better, and I'm like, oh, Mississippi, okay. I would say like oh, I enjoyed my experience in Mississippi a lot, but I feel like if I, with all I knew now, would have gone to Mississippi or picked Mississippi as a first choice, probably not? Just because you're like, oh, everybody was like, oh, I want to be in a city. But for me, as like for when your parents are kind of trying to look for a place where you're going to school, it depends, right? Some people is like, many parents is like, oh, where do I have someone close by, right, that I can like be with? And at that point, my dad had a as a brother in like Birmingham that was close by, so we were trying to just look for schools in that area, and so we chose like University of Alabama, Birmingham. We chose University of Mississippi, but I also like branched out and chose like University of Maine up north. Like, but then
Oh my goodness.
But like where I ended up choosing was the one that gave me the like best scholarship in there, which was Ole Miss. So then that was why I went.
Yeah.
Else I probably may have gone to Maine, for example, because I also got admission in there. But yeah, it's usually just like where you know someone sometimes, but they're also like agencies or like the US Embassy in Nigeria as an educational department, which I joined also. So we did choose other schools at that point, right? But I feel like the final choice was just based on what school did I get the most scholarship at, which was Ole Miss. But like transitioning here,
And also, like you said, it comes back to community.
it exactly. And I think like coming here, I think my first thing was like when I got to Oxford, I'm like, oh, this is more rural than Lagos. I think that was the first thing I thought of, that, oh, this is like smaller. And I think it's interesting because I feel like when people see like Nigerians or Africans, you think that like, oh, you know, when you come to America, you're like more wild where you are. But sometimes it's like, oh no, it's not that. It's like,
She was like,
This is-
I was not impressed.
yeah,
I
like,
was underwhelmed.
yeah, it was just like, but like I liked it because like there was just less people. And so like everywhere was just like less people, like, and I got used to that idea of like, oh wait, it's calm, like everything is calm, there's less people. But like I think for me, like I was never thinking about like the racial factor of like, oh, I'm seeing white people, because growing up, we watch a lot of American films and they're mostly white people. So when you're going to America, like in my head, I'm like, oh, I would expect to see white people. I would expect to see African Americans. Like for me, I wasn't thinking, what I was thinking of more was like, oh, where are the Nigerians here? Just in case to build that like community, so that you don't just feel like, oh my gosh, I've been dropped. But for me also, it was easier for me because I came with my younger sister, so I wasn't alone. So in a way, I already had somebody with me, right? So we were together when we
That's
came.
great.
So then it didn't really feel like, oh gosh, I've been dropped in the middle of nowhere. It was more of like, oh, me and my sister, we're both dropped in the middle of nowhere, but we have each other. So
You made a comment earlier that you went to college in Nigeria. So was that like just like a couple of classes? Did you do like an AA degree? Like what was that?
So it was just like, so initially, like I would say that like my parents had no plans to send me to the US or like send me abroad. So like for me, it was like right from high school, we just applied to college back home. And then I was at the University of Abuja. I think I spent almost 2 years over there doing computer science. But then I think it was like the turning point for
I think Ada's mom worked there.
Oh, cool. I think the turning point for my dad was just more of like, there was a time, I think in like my first year over there where like there was just a lot of people that were like admitted and the class was like really small. So then the professor was like, oh, you know, you guys are already so many and they're about to add like so many more of you. I'm no longer coming to class or things like that. So then I was just telling my dad, like, it was like, oh, you know, here, print the handout. I will see you doing the exams. And literally, we just read the documents and like exams happened. Like, we didn't have classes after then. So I was just like telling my dad I was like, wow, Dad, guess what?
Can we pause? We have to I want to just make sure I understand. Your professor said, I'm not coming to work.
Yeah, like,
read this. I'll see you when I test you on the work.
yeah, because it was just like there was like in a way like it sounds crazy now, but then it was just like even during the class there was so many people that like the people spilled out of the class. So imagine them adding another batch of that. Like, where are they gonna be? Like, it's gonna be so hard. Like, even for him, he probably won't be able to breathe in the class. But then it was just like, it was like,
did they not have like class size restrictions or anything? Or they're just like,
I don't,
want to pay more money, come on to class.
I think it was just more of like it was just like there was so many freshmen. All freshmen had to take that course. Like all freshmen in like specific departments, you all had to take that class. Then, like, if you don't take it, then you have to wait to take it. No one is gonna wait to take those classes. And I think they just like routed the class to like a very smaller venue because they had bigger venues in the university. I think they just routed that one to small, and I think he just got fed up of it. I think because that has never happened. I've never heard of.
Wow.
I think that was the first and last time I heard of such a situation because I never heard of it again. I'm like, okay, maybe all this was just my destiny to go abroad. Like maybe this specific thing happened just so I could go, because I was just like telling my dad like randomly. Like, just like, oh, dad, guess this absurd thing that happened, right? This professor is no longer coming to class. And, like, we're all supposed to read this handout and things like that. And my dad was like, okay, maybe you should start looking. That's like, oh, it was like, that's so weird. Maybe you should start looking and seeing, like, maybe there's something else abroad. So I was like,
gosh.
And then that was how the seed got planted.
And
I'm like,
that's how I ended up in
abroad.
Mississippi.
And that's how I ended up in Mississippi.
Wow. Wow, that is wild.
So both of my parents, that they met at Ole Miss, and I've never been there, and so I'm like super jealous.
No, I love
Oxford looks absolutely beautiful.
It is so beautiful. Oh my gosh. Like, I think that was the thing. It was just like the campus is like, compared to University of Florida, where you're like, University of Florida is huge, right?
Yeah.
Ole Miss, I feel like you can see the end. At least you can know, okay, this is where it started and this is where it ended. Like, it's not that it's that small, but at least I can say like, okay, this is where the university no longer has some building. But I feel like in Gainesville, like I go like 30 minutes away, I see University of Florida, something, and I'm like, okay, you have.
Yeah, there's so much sprawl.
There's so much sprawl for UF.
That is true.
Yeah, but Ole Miss is more like compact, and then they have the Jackson campus for the medical students. But like, it's so beautiful, especially like during the fall when the different colors are happening, and like it's just like different colors, and then they have this like grove. There's like where they have like events, and it's always just so beautiful, and you just felt like you could know everything going on the. I think that was what I appreciated about Ole Miss. You could kind of tell everything going on. Not that you're going to participate, at least I wouldn't, but I knew like all the sororities. I knew like the fraternities and things, because like they were like on campus close by to where you stay, so it was just nice to see like rush time when they're rushing, and you're just like, interesting, okay, I'm going to class. I think the only time that is like, the only time that's kind of interesting is like when they have like the elections, student elections. Then once you come out of the dorm, they're like lined up. You can't avoid. And then this person is like, vote for me. And you're just like, okay, but I don't know who you are.
Okay. Who are you?
Yeah. So that.
What is your platform?
Yeah, but it kind of just helped you feel like you knew everything going on campus. Like UF was different, but also I can't really like UF. I was in grad school. I'm in the department anyway, so even if there was something going on, I couldn't really say I knew what was happening.
Amazing.
So I want to ask more about Ole Miss. So you were a computer science major there. Like, since you had done, a good amount of schooling before, like, did that prepare you for Ole Miss, or what was it like doing computer science there?
Yeah.
And just like, did you do any like research or things like that?
Yeah, I would say, like, to be honest, Ole Miss is what prepared me to where I am right now, like going into the PhD, because I had like a lot of like good mentors, and I got into research from Ole Miss. I think when I started at Ole Miss, I appreciated the fact that I had already done 2 years in Nigeria, because I had already learned the like, I feel like when I think of programming, right, I tell people like, it's not that programming is hard, but it is something different. So you kind of have to rewire your brain to kind of start thinking in that different way, so that way you kind of understand programming. So I feel like being in Nigeria, those 2 years helped to reprogram that my brain to kind of think in that sense. So when I got to Ole Miss, it was easier to like acclimatize and understand the like literature. Of course, sometimes it was hard, many times it was hard, but thankfully, like, you just like, I had help, and you have like people who can like, you can reach out to, that like fellow students who can like explain some things for you. And I found it like, I appreciated that I did some computer science back home, though if not, I think I may have struggled a lot more, but I think I was able to acclimatize, and they had like really good teachers also, and so like they pushed you. And I think in my second year was when I got into research, because I was like looking for something to do. I was a TA already, and like my Dr. Wilkins, who was the she was like a senior faculty there. And so I spoke to her, and then she was like, oh, okay, maybe I can get into my research lab with another professor. And so that's how I started research in my second year. And so it was like research on like
Wow.
expectation maximization algorithm stuff. And it was just nice being in that like research thing and being around other people who are doing research, although it was very like algorithmic computer science research. And so I was like, okay, computer science is fun for me, but I feel like right from time I knew that like I don't think I wanted to really be a software engineer where like all I'm doing is like teaching the computer how to do. I felt like, oh, I want to see the impact on people. For me, like to me that was what like
Yeah.
motivated me. So I remember one time in undergrad I saw the like top 50 jobs or something there in the US, and it was like, oh, top 50 computer science or tech jobs ish or so. And then they said UI UX in there, and I was like, oh, what is UI UX in there? And then I read about it, and I'm like, oh, okay. And at that point I was like, I don't think I can get into this. I'm like, I'm already in the computer science part. This looks like a whole different ball game. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm like in another life, I guess. So I just like ignored it at that point.
In another life.
In there, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
I was like, okay, I don't think I can get into this. I'm like, I'm on the computer science, but it looks like this part is fixed. But then things kind of changed when it was time to apply to grad school. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, so then you decided, oh, first, while you were at Ole Miss, did you do any like clubs or activities, things like that?
Yes, so and while I was at Ole Miss, I was part of the African Caribbean Association, which is the association for more of like Nigerians and all Africans and Caribbeans. So that's where many of my friends were like, so that was that community aspect of things because we all got together, and most of my close friends were all Nigerians also at Ole Miss in there. Like I felt like I could feel the Nigerian community a lot in Ole Miss. So they were like times we hung out
important.
together, and it was really nice over there. Outside of that,
Was
I
there
was also
food?
part of the
That's what I need to
ACM.
know.
There's always food. when
There's,
there's
yeah,
foods
there is
involved.
always food, and I was part of the people preparing that food. There was always
Oh.
food in many of the events. Like we would prepare food and call people to like gather. Like there was a time I celebrated my sister's birthday, and I kind of threw like kind of like get together thing, and we cooked like a lot of Nigerian dishes. And then a lot of the Nigerians came, and then we all like ate together, celebrated. So those times were fun. I feel like at UF I didn't really get involved with the community as much. I would say they have a large community there also. It's just like
Yes.
I just don't think I had
Definitely.
the time. I don't think I had the time to like
Yeah.
I think that was the issue. I don't think because a lot of times like, and at UF is interesting. So at Ole Miss, usually things end earlier. I feel like there were not really events at night in Ole Miss, but coming to UF, like you have all this like 7 p.m. events or 8, and you're just like, but I want to go home
Yeah.
though. It's like, why would I be like, if I've been in school all day, like if I've been in school all day, why
Yeah.
do you think, like, why would you think I want to be here at 7 p.m.?
Why do I want to stay?
Yeah, like why would I
It's
want
like
to stay?
You make a
An
good
old
point.
woman in a young
make a
person's
great
body.
point.
Like I am 23. I don't want to be outside.
And I'm going home.
Yeah, it's just like,
What is this sunshine? I'm
yeah,
going
it's
home.
like you all know that like the department has no windows, right? So like you're just like, I just want to
Yeah.
go home
Yeah.
and just like rest. Now I'm like, and then not think that I'm in school, but like you're telling me to stay
Yeah.
here to 7, 8, like we literally had exams in the evening at UF. Like that doesn't that doesn't
Yeah.
happen. In like I've had like exams where I had to leave school at 10 p.m. or like almost 11 p.m.
Oh my
algorithm
gosh.
exams, and I'm just like, why are we having exams at night, people? Like it was like interesting. So like there was
You
that
make a
change
good
of
point.
dynamic.
You make a very
Yeah.
good point.
It's the same reason why that class that had a bazillion people, the teacher left and said he ain't coming no more because there's not
Exactly.
enough
It's
space.
just- exactly. It's just that
Yeah.
in America you can't leave. You don't have that option. So you're just like, oh, we'll make it work.
You don't have nope.
You have because like we had
Nope, you
algorithm.
can leave, but you're gonna fail.
Exactly. Like we had algorithm classes of like 7:25 a.m. and like at Ole Miss classes don't start till I think like 9 or so at Ole Miss or 8 something. So
Yeah.
like when I
This
first
is
found out
not
the
an
first class of the day
endorsement
is
for the
7
University of Mississippi.
No, it is not.
Or is it?
But like classes at UF for 7:25, and it was just like really hard getting used to that dynamic of like in the
Yeah.
morning. So I appreciated that, like at least my experience at UF classes at 7:25 tend to have recordings. So in a way, I'm like, oh, you're giving me a choice. Please come or don't come. And so then it's like,
Yeah. But
okay,
if you don't make it, here's the material.
yes, the material, exactly. So then I used to go for algorithm in the morning, and after some point, I'm like, I can't do this. It is too early. And but that was also because it was recordings. So I was just like, I'll just watch the recordings, right? And so I think I later, almost exam points, I like attended the class, but that was the day it was given extra points for those in attendance. So I was like,
Of course.
thank you.
Of
Of
course.
I'll be there.
course. It was when I decided to be. Yeah, but it was, yeah, it's good.
Yeah, even being the professor who has to get up that early, it is anxiety inducing
It
because
is.
I think I'm going to oversleep class every single time I have an early class. And I'm like, I can't live like
I already
this.
told
Yeah.
I
them,
would never
folks,
get a
don't
good
ever
night's
play me
sleep.
like that. I refuse. Like, if it's earlier than 9:30, y'all are gambling with my arrival being on time. Like, I will tell
Yeah.
them
On
kids,
time,
like,
that's true.
show up at 9.
Yeah.
And I have students, and on the first day, I would say, "Oh, who's a morning person?" And maybe 3 people raise their hand. I'm like, "Okay, the rest of us are
Right.
struggling."
Like,
Yeah,
we
the rest
all
of
just
us-
here today.
That's true. We're just here. Like my kinesiology class in like my fourth year was a 7:25 a.m. class. You all had to be in class. Like it wasn't like a, oh, you're not gonna be in class. So like
No.
that time was when I felt like I became a morning person because I had to leave with a 6:30 a.m. bus. And like so I was a morning person. So even on days when it wasn't class time, I would wake
Oh,
up at
man.
6:30. Like I'm awake at that time. So yeah, that was.
So
But then
sad.
I think there's
Oh,
just something.
man.
But there's something about the mornings though. I feel like while I wouldn't say I'm a morning person, I feel like the days when I wake up and start that early, I feel like a bit more productive actually because by afternoon I'm like,
Yeah.
now I can go and I don't feel guilty like saying like I'm done with the day because I'm like I woke
Yeah.
up early.
I'm done at 3 because
Exactly.
I've been here all day.
I've been there all day.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That is funny. Okay, so you were at Ole Miss and you said, I have not had enough computer sciencing. I would like to do more. So, well, first, sorry, I had another question before that. So, was your sister also in CS or did she major in something else?
No, she was in chemical engineering. Yes, so she did chemical engineering.
Okay, still engineering, still
engineering,
keeping
yeah.
the theme. So when you were done, you said, "All right, I'm out. I'm going to Florida." You know, what was that like? Wait, like when you were thinking about schools, you know, what did you keep in mind there? 'Cause
Yes.
I know one of the major decisions for your area was, hey, I know people that are here and I have communities. So, who encouraged you to go to grad school and like how did you choose to?
Yes. So I would say like back to the Nigerian thing. Usually we don't feel like bachelor's is enough. We feel like, oh, you're going to do masters at some point, right? You may not do it immediately, but we always kept it in mind that like you're not only going to do bachelor's, you're going to do like a master's program. So for me, it was more of like, I think my decision was more of like finances. I'm like, okay, my daddy is paid, actually it's part of this payment here. And I'm like, I don't want to do any other education that will require any payment. So, and I know many masters you still need to pay. But then my advisors were like, oh, you know what? Why don't you think of like the PhD? They're like, oh, you're already doing research anyways, and most PhDs are like tuition free and you get a stipend. So I started looking into it and be like, okay, I don't want to go to the industry or work anyways right now. So I'm like, oh, okay, let's look at this. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to just do a PhD in computer science. In terms of looking for schools, I feel like the community aspect, I wouldn't even say was the thing either at that point. At that point, I was looking to like, okay, what are the top schools? But when I say top schools, I'm like, okay, Aisha, I'm going to cut my coat according to my size. What are those schools? Like I use the Forbes list and be like, okay, here is where I want to stick my like pins at. What are the schools within this area? What are schools people already know that? And most importantly, actually, one thing about Ole Miss being like a smaller school, but also being an international student, which is its own struggle, right? Is that many companies come and they don't hire international students. at all. And then at Ole Miss
Yeah.
also, like, that was even more so the case. So for me, I was like, whatever school I'm going to, I want to go to a school where there are more companies that will come, so that maybe the probability that I would get like an internship or like a career was higher at that point. And so my Nigerian friend was like, oh, I went for a career fair at University of Florida, and it was really great. So I was like, oh, I'm going to add UF to the list. And also, like, coincidentally, the
Okay.
Ole Miss has like a university partnership also with UF. So like what that means is that the engineering school will send messages to students and being like, oh, the University of Florida is looking for students to apply and we think you should apply there. So I also got that email from the engineering school. So I was like, okay, we're gonna apply to UF also. And then I applied to like a bunch of other schools like Georgia Tech and the rest of them. The first school I got admission into was University of Illinois at Chicago, right? So for a long time, I got like the TA funding for that. So I was like, oh, maybe that's what I'll go to. But then in my head, I was like, it's cold. It is, and then my advisor would always tell me like, Aisha, it is cold
Yeah.
over there. Like I grew up in Chicago, I left because it's cold. So in my head,
It's
at the
so
back, I'm like,
cold.
It is
okay,
cold.
it is so
It is
cold.
cold.
So I was like, do I want to do
And that
something
lake
so cold?
effect.
Yeah.
Snow.
And I'm like, do I
No.
want to do that?
Yeah.
And I was like, not really. And she was like, Aisha, it's not just cold, it's like windy cold.
Windy cold.
And so I was like,
Yes.
okay, yes.
The Windy City. That's why they
Yes.
call it that.
So I was like,
Yeah.
yeah. So I was like, okay, I will just wait and see if I get something else. And so later I got the University of Florida one. And so then I was asking like advice from advisors that like, oh, which should I go for? UIC, University of Florida. And so they were like, oh, go to UF. It's like more top rank. We know the school. Like it has a great program. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, Florida is great. Like I'm like, Windy City versus like Florida, which they told me was sunny then. Now I know better. Gainesville is not always sunny, but still, it's not like as bad as like Chicago. Chicago
Gainesville,
cold. So
also
then
known
I'm
as
like,
Yeah.
Brainsville.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So then I'm like, okay, fine, Florida it is, and so that was how I ended up at UF.
Wow. Okay. So you mentioned not having a whole lot of time as a grad student. So what was that transition like? So some people think that grad school is just going to be like, oh yeah, there's more classes, just like undergrad, just different classes. Like, was there like a mind shift that needed to happen going from undergrad to grad?
Yeah, I think the biggest mind shift was like I had to like self motivate myself and make sure that like, oh, Aisha, I know why I'm here, and I need to keep reminding myself why I'm here, like or like why I need to be here. I think
You
that
had
was the biggest
affirmations.
shift. Yes, I had to like remind, because sometimes it was, many times it was challenging, and you just have to be like, why am I doing this again? Like, what? Like, I need to remind myself, like, where am I trying to get to? Like, why exactly am I here? And you hear all these like talks we had in the department of people saying, like, oh, the grad student has like more depression than the national average. And I'm like, that is
Yeah.
surely true. I'm like, yep, I am so sure that is, because this
Yeah.
is challenging sometimes, and it like mentally it can be like like weird. But I think it was I think for me, being in grad school, especially at University of Florida, what I really appreciated was the diversity, like seeing more like black people, women. It's interesting because like people talk about like, and I know more about diversity now, but I would say like in undergrad, it was when I got to UF I reflected back and I was like, oh, this was why there was no female in those computer science places, or oh, this is why it was filled with white people. I didn't know that. In my head I just thought maybe like, oh, it's in this school, this is just how it is here. So in my head I'm like, oh yeah. And growing up in Nigeria, right, the old gender thing where it's like, oh, women may not be able to do certain, it was not really a thing as much, like, because we're like, you had so many role models that you could see, like,
Yeah.
oh, your parents are engineers here, this like computer scientists, them, like, the female ones. And so it wasn't that much. So coming to the
Yeah.
US, in my head I just felt like, okay, maybe just this place, that's just how it is. There are just so many males than females here. But then it was when I got to grad school and I started learning more, then I'm like, oh, okay, wait, it is a thing whereby like, oh, they may be less female or like black women, especially in community. It was that also took me as like a surprise and something that I'm like, oh, okay, I'm trying to understand like what could be the underlying factors that could have resulted in like such disparity in there. And so in at
Yeah,
you
because where you came from, it was more so like the population was huge. So it's like, okay, I see everybody looks the same. So there's no there's no boundaries because you see everyone doing
exactly
every job and they look
everyone
exactly the
was
same.
doing every job
Yeah.
looking exactly the same. In my computer science department at University of Abuja, then there were lots of girls. Like in my head, I didn't think there were
Mm-hmm.
more guys than girls. There were like lots of females. So for me, it was just like, oh, people are just choosing the careers they wanted in there. But now coming
Yeah.
here, I'm like, oh wait, there is that difference in like the situations or the barriers. And so like for me, it's like you can do anything you want, like you can do anything you set your mind to, is how I think of it. However, I do realize that like if I grew up in a situation where it felt as if I've been told that I couldn't, then of course it will feel like
Mm-hmm.
I can't, because the only reason why I would have said I chose
Mm-hmm.
engineering was because like in Nigeria you're just like giving that like doctor, lawyer, so you're not thinking of like, oh, I can't do this. It's just more of like, what am I gonna pick
Which one?
amongst this? Because
Mm-hmm.
which one
Yeah.
should I pick here? And of course, people change careers. It's like, oh, but like, not like you have people who I know, like going to school. Like in my set in at Queen's College, many people wanted to be doctors, and like they would fight tooth and nail to be doctors. Like nothing was like holding them back or things like that. If you wanted to be a lawyer, you are gonna be a lawyer. So it was. I think also being with all girls at that point also helped, because like you had the computer scientists, the doctors, all sort of things. So for me, I think I've been privileged not to feel like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't do like what I set
Mm-hmm.
my mind to. But I do acknowledge that that is not the case for a majority of people, and I'm looking forward to a future where people can feel like you can do whatever you want regardless of like who you are.
That's amazing. Like to grow up somewhere like that. Like I have a friend from US Virgin Islands and she always says the same thing. Like she didn't realize that certain people didn't do certain things until she got to America. And she's like, what's wrong with y'all? Like
Yes, there was,
yeah.
yeah, I would acknowledge that there are some things you may think are more like male kind of, or like dominated areas. Like of course, like we still add the thing of like nurses, you just think, oh, nurses is not for females, it's for men. You still have those things, but it's not that, oh, you can't do as well as them. It's just that, oh, I don't see many people that look at me like me there. Like it doesn't just seem like that is for me. Like females don't want to go to a place where it's all men anyways, like I feel like. So you're just like, okay, that is not. But now
Yeah.
things are changing also. You have male nurses everywhere. Like it's just
Mm-hmm.
dynamic shift, I guess.
Yeah. So, transitioning back to your grad school experience, a lot of people don't know once you enter grad school, you usually join a research lab with like an advisor. So, you had said previously you thought that UI, UX, those sorts of things were off the table for you in another lifetime, but you ended up in a related human centered computing sort of area. So, how did you get there when you thought this wasn't even an option for you before?
Yes. So I think when I was applying to grad school, one of the schools I applied to was Texas A&M, right? So then the professor there, I think it's Dr. Quack, he like reached out and was talking
Mhm.
about what he does, and like he was talking about human computer interaction. He was talking about like his research, and I'm like, oh wait, what is human computer interaction thing? And so then I searched it and I'm like, oh wait, this is like that UI UX thing. So like, oh, this road isn't closed yet for me. And then so like, but then I still was like applying either ways. And then Dr. Anthony Lisa reached out to me and talked about a lab
Friend of the
also.
podcast.
Yes. Yeah, so I'm my advisor while I was in grad school. So she reached out to me before I even got admission into UF, and was just telling me about the lab and what they do, and like, oh, natural user interaction, working with children. And it just sounded cool. I'm like, oh wait, what is this? This is like computer science, but like this is not computer science. It's like something more. Like it feels like, oh, we are doing something more. Like it felt as if like, oh, you could make a change in the world. So for me, I was like, oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So then once I got into grad school, of course, like during my time was when like the school finally got accreditation for human-centered computing and computer. So when I joined it, I still joined as a computer engineer because that was the only accredited degree at that point. And so for me, I still didn't think I was going to go into the human-centered anything because the department didn't have that. I just knew that I would do a research that may be related to that. But then they were like, oh, they got accreditation for human-centered computing, and then they got accreditation for computer science. And that was the time when they then asked everybody to be like, which one do you want? Here, you can only choose one. So for me, I was researching all three. And then I was like, that human-centered computing sounds like fun, because also I was like, I had already done a bunch of classes for computer science. I was like, this cannot go to waste. So let's look at the like degrees and what I need to fulfill, and everything just matched. I was like, oh, human-centered computing it is. For the research area though, that was also the first time where like they changed the qual. So previously I was already worried about the qual exam, because I'm like, we're taking classes. Why exactly do I have to take this exam, and like things that may not be even related to like what my research is? But then thankfully we started hearing the buzz that like, oh, they were gonna change that also. Dr. Gilbert was gonna like change that. And I'm like, great, everything is just like matching up at this point. So then they changed the qual exam at that point. And then there was also the year they instituted this thing of like seminars, right, for first year grad students. So like every research lab
I didn't realize everything changed your year.
Yes, it all changed in that
I didn't
year.
realize all that. Yeah, everything changed your year. Everything changed for the better.
It all changed for the better, and it was in that one time when I joined that it all
Yeah.
changed, because then we always had seminars. Dr. Gilbert came to talk. Dr. Boyer came to talk. I think the Dr. McCune talk. I think maybe Dr. McCune also, and then Dr. Anthony. And at that point also, I was a teaching assistant, because just as a way to try out whether I'll be a fit for Lisa's lab also. So I was doing that, but also just looking at other research areas and just trying to understand like where my best fit was. And then I ended up in Lisa's lab. Yes.
Nice.
Oh.
Nice. Oh, that's great. Like that's always, that's not always everyone's story. Sometimes it might take 2 or 3 tries to figure out,
That's
whose
true.
lab
That's
you're going to
true.
be in.
That's
But
true.
for folks who don't know what quals is, it's one stage of the PhD process where, short for qualifiers, where you take some sort of examination to determine if you'll persist in the program. So before we had the subject area tests, where even if you're doing human-centered computing, you might have to take an exam in algorithms that may not be as
Or
pertinent
networking.
to what you're doing. Yeah, or networking, or just things that, yes, are part of the computer science discipline, but might not be relevant to your research. So we wanted to make it way more research relevant. So it changed to a survey paper, because now you're surveying the topic that you're actually doing your research on. So it was a win-win for
Made it more
everybody.
relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it made it more relevant.
Also,
Yeah.
professors were losing our students to quals, and it's not even like you come out on the other side a better researcher in our area. You just come out a better computer scientist with skills you may not even
I don't know
need
if
to
you
use in the future.
I don't even know if you come out a better computer scientist though, just because like sometimes it's rote. No, seriously, it's rote memorization. Like you try to memorize, you try to solve a lot
Yeah.
of past papers, and then what students were doing would be that like you knew some of the areas were harder than others, so you're trying to pick the areas that's like at least easier. So like many people did networking, something like just because like it felt like okay, maybe I could pass this exam compared to, but like I feel like with the survey paper,
Yeah.
it was just what I was doing. It made me a better researcher in my space. Like once I did the survey paper, any other paper I was writing, I didn't have to be worried about like what is the literature that supports this, because it's like, oh, I just did all that. The only tricky part
you've
is
already went into it. Yeah.
the only tricky part is where you change your research area after your qual. Then it's like
So you might do 2 survey papers.
exactly.
Yeah, but then it's
But then
necessary
it's-
though
yeah.
in general, because anything you're going to do research in, you need to be up to date in what
exactly
all the
what
research
yes,
is. So.
exactly.
So what were you researching during grad school?
So I would say my research shifted, but like my main research was mostly on like children. Like so one of the things we recognize and Lisa's lab we were focusing on was that a lot of research kind of overlooks children, especially when you think about algorithms and like recognition algorithms, which are like algorithms that are automatically trained on children's natural user interaction, maybe their motions, maybe their face recognition, or maybe their gaze. Those things are usually trained on adults. Like most of the data sets are for adults, and then you then like make all these applications, but then those applications were trained on adults and may not necessarily be recognize children's motions or their natural user interactions well. So our work was focused more on like how to like change that dynamic and try to understand like if you were going to tailor this to children, what were the things you needed to keep in mind. So for me specifically, I focus more on like all body interactions, motions, and trying to understand like if we have a data set of children's motions, how can we understand like or qualitatively and quantitatively identify features that characterize children's motions, so that that way we can, and then compare it to adults motions and find out the differences, so that we can propose design guidelines to tailor motion recognition systems to children's motions. So that was my focus.
That's really cool. So what were some like findings? Like, was there anything that you found out that you were like, oh, that's really cool?
I would say that like I think for me it was more of some of the things that were validated quantitatively, where you've like what people don't realize is how much movement children make for like a similar motion. Like even when you just ask a child to like exactly exactly, like even when you just ask a child to like raise their hand, like motions like raise your hand, I think there's still like differences, but you will find that like for those upper body motions that are like more simple, yes, exactly. We add actually that where like a kid goes up, yeah, we add that. But like for those motions are still more similar to adults' motions though, because like they're you like they don't require a lot of joints that children have to move. So you find out that you could still find similarities, but then you start to find those differences when they're like more complex whole body motions. So like jumping jacks, oh my gosh, like jumping jacks, adults tend to be in one place and jump. Children are jumping, they're jumping jacks, they start in the middle, they may
All over the
arrive
place.
somewhere else. So then you start to notice those differences in there, and if you don't take that into consideration, then it just may not work as well for children, especially like for many applications where you're like, oh, here is the boundary line with which you can be like, the children necessarily keep to that boundary line, you never know. But like if
No.
you don't tailor it to children, then like injuries would happen. Like you're gonna like cause a lot of issues for the little
Yeah.
ones. So
That's hilarious. How old in the children range were you looking at?
5 to 10. So we're doing 5 to 10,
Oh,
and there are other
yeah.
like renowned, yeah, there are other renowned,
Chaos.
there are other renowned professors in the field.
That reminded
also.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah. That reminded me of like I have this game Just Dance, and like if we have kids over, we'll have them like playing that in the room, and there's like this little part where they have to like stand in a certain spot for the system to recognize them. And just literally from what you said, the kids need to stand in the boundaries. They're like, I'm over here. Like it says stand right here.
Stand
They're
right
like,
here
it
in the
doesn't say
boundary.
me.
Yes, exactly.
Like, you have no stand right here is so difficult for that age range.
Yes.
Now I
Now
know
we
why.
know.
Yes.
Or at least I know the Just Dance people need to have like a kids mode where they just
They
say,
need
look,
to, like-
everybody just dance.
Exactly, exactly.
There
Like a
doesn't need to be
kid's
any
mode.
boundaries.
Like just
jump around.
just dance.
Yeah, just literally just dance. Just we'll figure out who's there.
That's real. So, from this research area, you ended up at Meta, and it looks like you've interned there before, so you had some experience with them, and you clearly liked them enough to continue that relationship. Are you with the same group?
No, not really. No, not the same. Not but the same area. I feel like, but not the same group. It's still the same area. I think what is interesting now, like I feel like what I enjoy about the PhD, and I think this is just something for people. A lot of academics want to go into the industry, right? And I think one of the things that we may not be like leaning on well is how to understand that, like, yes, you may have a specialized area you did, but really what makes the PhD really important are those skills you gained. The ability to like understand problem critically, research those problems, find solutions, and propose guidelines for it. These are skills we've gained over time. Yes, our topic areas may be different, but when we own in on those skills, you can apply them literally to like any other field. So like my field right now at Meta is not necessarily like human-centered I would say it's more on the social science aspect of things, right? Yes, I still bring in my human-centered computing skills, but I would say that this more falls under like being a social scientist, I would say more. But
What
like
does
it's
your
because
team
like those
look
skills
like?
so my
Like-
team like is a typical product team, really. Usually like your teams have it has researchers, so user experience researchers. Then it would have like product designers. It would have like engineers, data scientists, and let's see, it will have product managers, so PMs. Also, the constitution of the team, or how many differs. Like, so previously my team was like
Mm-hmm.
more of a producty team. My team now is more owned towards like just having like a PM, having like researchers, and then product designers, and yeah, so that's mainly the constitution of my team right now. But really is like most teams are like product teams, so like regardless of your team, you're trying to like ensure you're improving product in some way.
Mm.
Okay. I want to go back to something you were talking about before. So, as a computer scientist who's in academia, I have students who want to go to academia, students who want to go to industry, but one of the challenges is helping them to market those like transferable skills. So, like during your interview process, like what was like the main difference between like, focusing on what you did for the PhD? Like, how did you flip your mind into, instead of thinking about a specific research topic, into, hey, these are all the skills that
Mm-hmm.
I can actually do? And I'm asking you this selfishly because I want to tell my students this
Yes, yes,
because
yes.
they're always asked, and I'm like, I don't know, I didn't go to industry. So like, how did you do that mind shift to talk about what you do more abstractly versus, with research we focus on, one type of
Yes,
topic or
yes.
area.
I always tell people that like if there was something I learned from like doing the internship and like going into like getting a full-time job, I feel like something that we may need to market better during our PhD is like I think of things now more like rather than top down. So most of the time you like start the PhD and at the end you're like, okay, what job am I looking for? But at that time it may be a bit late, just because like as a time you were doing all those PhD projects, you were not really thinking about like how to market it back to this end job, especially if you want to do UX research. I feel like research scientists sometimes may be less likely, just because a lot of research scientists may be in spaces that are just like one to one with what they're doing. So like, there's less marketing needed. But a lot of time for UX research opportunities, like what you want to think about is more of like, yes, I did this project, but regardless of the project I did, there's some core skills to UX research. For example, so for example, like you have to define a problem, you have to talk to stakeholders, you have to decide the method, you have to understand the constraints, then you have to decide, why did I use this methodology, what is the rationale for me using this methodology. I have to either do some qualitative or quantitative, why did I pick one over the other, like having those, like we don't think of it, we do it like abstractly, like you did all those things in your head, but you never really like concretely thought of it and put it on paper, but you did all
Mm-hmm.
those steps, right? And so when it comes to the interviewing for industry, those steps that you were doing subconsciously are what they want to see you articulate at that point,
Mm-hmm.
right? And want to see how you apply.
That's
So they
really
want to
good.
understand, how did you define the problem? Who did you talk to? What stakeholders are you going to talk to? If you talk to stakeholder, how did you understand the constraints, right? If your constraint was like monetary constraint or financial constraint, which we do have in academia, we usually have financial constraint, but more importantly, we have recruitment constraints in academia. Most times you
Mm-hmm.
like kind of like
Yeah.
get like computer scientists, undergrads and grad students, there were limitations to that, but like you have no choice because they're just constraints with like compensation or other things. So you deal with what you have, and we have the limitation sections in the paper that we do. But those things we do,
Mm-hmm.
like in UX, you want to understand that like you may have more money. In this case, like, okay, maybe you have more money. If
Mm-hmm.
you had more money, if you had infinite resources, what would you do differently? If you had very little resources, even, what would you do differently, right? And you have to kind of think of the rationale and be able to communicate this rationale to them. You have to communicate, okay, I did this research with this method. Why did you choose this method? Why did you think a qualitative method would have worked? Like, why did you decide to do interviews versus focus groups? If you did a quantitative, okay, why did you do a quantitative something? If you did a quantitative method or like a survey, okay, how did you ensure that like the sample sizing, how did you determine the sample sizing? Most times in academia, like, this is who we got. Like, really, like, this is the number
Yep.
of people we got. Like, no,
Yeah.
really,
This is who was
this is who
available.
was
This is what we
available. But
got.
like most times in industry, like you're calculating those sample sizes at least for like in HCI fields, at least I will talk for HCI field. You're calculating like sample sizing. You're trying to understand also that like, okay, am I going to generalize this to the population of users? In what cases can I generalize it to the population? In what cases can I not generalize it to the population of users? And you're just making those like dots and connecting those dots together. And as PhD students, you have to try to understand, if I wanted to do UX research, or I wanted to do a research scientist, or I want to be a software engineer, because you may want to do any and all paths. As you may say, oh, I want to do X, and then when you're about to like graduate, like Y is what is opened for you at that point, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, for me, it was preparing for all those different possibilities. Like, oh, if I wanted to be a data scientist, if I wanted to be a software engineer, if I wanted to go to academia, did I have everything in place to be like competitive enough? Because people, I feel like one misconception that people have, and I'm like, it's something that many people are realizing is a myth in a way, is that, oh, you have a PhD, you have a higher chance of getting an industry job. Not necessarily. It depends. Like, it really depends. Like, particularly for UX research, because at least for me, my experience, when I was like, when I got a full-time job at Meta, there was some challenges at the beginning. So I was like trying to look for other opportunities anyway, so that I just don't put all my eggs in one basket. So of course I was applying to other things, and most of the times they'll say like they'll say like, oh, experience in UX research and things like that. But what you realize when you start talking to many companies, especially like the companies that may not be as big as like Meta or Google or Microsoft, is that they sometimes have a misconception of what a PhD person does, right? So they feel like, oh, you are only specialized in this case. So for them, they're looking for
Yeah.
industry experience. So like for us, the PhD is an experience. Like, I spent 6
Right.
years owning my research skills, owning my problem solving skills. But not everybody understands that. And also because we may not communicate it well, as to like, okay, how can I take the skills I learned and transform it to what the industry cares about? And so I tell people, I'm like, as a PhD student, try to look for, like, if you're interested in UX research, go to like different companies' job sites, look at what their responsibilities are, what the skills they're looking for, take a project of yours, right, and start working bottoms up, right? Now that you're in school, like, try to say like, okay, this project, this is what I did. But like, if I was to define it as to like, what methodology did I use? Right? Why did I choose this methodology? What constraints did I consider, and things like that, right? And then you then walk your way back and be like, okay, then what happened as a result? Like, what was something that happened? What was the impact of what I did? And try to ensure that you can communicate that well, because then you start to stand out. And then also having a research portfolio. As at my point, research at my time, which I would say my time was just like 2-3 years ago, a research portfolio wasn't like necessary. But I've seen it now that like in many cases, it's not that it is still like a compulsory thing, but a lot of times it's a competition out here. If someone else has a research portfolio and you
Yeah.
don't, you just like minimize your chances. And particularly, like, I'm an international student, my chances are already like much, 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 much limited, because once they see my name, sometimes they're just like, oh, we don't sponsor, so like, why would we bring this person on here? So it's ensuring you can communicate like the skills you developed over the PhD in a way that like everyone can, like, the recruiters and the hiring managers on the back end can like call you for an interview.
Yeah. No, that is really important. Like, that also identifies like a really big gap that we have in the PhD education. Like, if you want to go into academia, cool. We have
Cool.
everything you want
Everything
to
is
know.
there.
But for folks who want to go to industry, I'm always like, now, how can we supplement this information? Because like what you're saying is stuff that you had to kind of learn in
Exactly.
time. It's not like, you had formal training for that. So yeah, I'm going to definitely, ruminate on this a little bit more. So we're always looking at how to improve our
I
program.
heard the word communication. I don't know how many
Yes,
times
so did I.
in the transferable skills description. So I feel like that is really a very important factor to consider.
Yeah.
Amara has joined us. So
Hello,
you wanna say
Mara.
hello?
Hi.
Okay, you get a little squeal.
Okay, we'll take it. She's hilarious. So I know that you can't get into the specifics of your job, but we do know that you help to make sure that the products that are put out meet the needs and motivations and of diverse user populations. So can you just give us high level, how did your training help you to do this? Like, why is it even important to think about this and the focus of your job?
Yeah. So I think of it like a full circle. So I like I mentioned in grad school, I focus on children, which is an overlooked like category of people when we think about tech, right? So for me, I've always been interested in like, people whom like the product is not necessary. Like, it's not that the product may not consider them, but they're not like your first people, and they're not the main people you're trying to design for. So when you think of people with disabilities, you think of racial minorities and all those different like unique user base whose needs, while they may overlap with the general population, they have specific unique needs that are just different from what the general population may necessarily have. So for me, it's just like similar to how I was focusing on children as a way to like help improve the technologies for them. I consider it the same way, but in this case, it may not necessarily be children. It could be other groups. So it could be people with disabilities. It could be racial minorities. It could be gender minorities. So, or like religious minorities, for example, and just understanding what are their needs, like for specific products, right? And like how can we improve this product to better match their needs?
Yeah, and I think some of this does this fall into like universal design and some of your methodology.
So universal design, yeah, so some of it universal design, but not really. Like for me, more of like, it's more from a research perspective, right? Of like, how can I ensure that like maybe when I'm
Okay.
researching, right? How do I like research a specific group of users, or how do I like in my survey like kind of oversample some specific users in my survey, right? And try to ensure that like, oh, this responses, right, well, for these people, like talk to experts. Like, how can I talk to experts from that represent some of these communities to understand like what are the challenges, what are the needs they have, and things like that. And then
Oh,
like
that
come
makes
up with like
sense. That
actionable
definitely
product
makes sense.
solutions. And I think that's another thing, like when we think of transitioning from academia to industry, like HCI is different. Like for we HCI, we do a lot of design guidelines, right? So that was really helpful for me going into the industry, because in the industry you have to think of like actionable product solutions, right? Meaning that like you just don't want to be like, oh, do X. It has to be something that can be taken by like an engineer or a product manager and implemented, right? So for me, being in the HCI, HCC field kind of helped with that, because like we were already picking design guidelines that like you were saying that like anybody building an application can take this and just translate. So I find that like that skill was very helpful being in the industry to kind of interpret what my findings are to like actionable product solutions.
No, that makes total sense. I was just thinking too about how like sometimes when you're designing for a specific population, people who aren't even in that population will find it
Exactly.
useful.
So
And it
like
was reminding me of like Siri. Yeah.
the cup cutting effect also is
And how
something we
like
think
Siri
about.
started off as like excessive. Wait, what is it called?
The
The what
cup
effect?
cutting effect. The cup cutting
Can you
effect.
explain what that is?
So like the cup cutting effect is where like you I think it was like for the cups or things like that. I think they designed it for like specific people. I think people with like disabilities or so, but it ended up being useful for like just
Oh,
general
yeah, yeah, yeah.
pedestrians. It ended up being useful for people with strollers and things like that. Yeah.
The little bumps like at the end of
Yeah,
the
the little bumps.
curve
Yeah.
to like
Exactly.
prevent
Exactly.
wheelchairs from rolling directly into the
From like
street
rolling
essentially.
directly into the street, and now it's like useful for everyone.
Right, because people were looking down, not on their cell phones. It's like, oh wait, the ground just changed. I might be walking into
If
traffic.
it's a
Yeah.
traffic.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
I almost lost a stroller to
If
the
you-
to the roads. There
Oh
wasn't a
no.
kid in it.
Oh.
It
At
was
least you
just,
were not in the road.
you know, slope.
Wow.
Wow.
So, one other thing that I wanted to ask about your position, I know, or at least around your work environment, like, do you still have a support system? Have you been able to
Yeah,
find
you're all the way in
community where you
California.
are? Yeah.
Yeah, so like interestingly, like here in California, I have a roommate. So we went to high school together. So we were in Queens College together,
Oh,
and now
wow.
yeah, so
That's
now we're
cool.
like roommates. So which is cool. And then I also have some like other friends. I think at Meta itself, I've been able to like find community also. Like we have like we call it like resource groups, like employee resource groups, right? So where you may have like people who share a common goal or who share a common identity. So being a Muslim or being a Nigerian or being an African, you have like a community for you. And so then you can kind of meet like-minded people in that sense. Yeah. I think I need to do better to find like Nigerian Muslims though. I don't think I've done a good job at it yet. But maybe that'll be like 2024 goal.
I like it.
Oh, I like it too. That's real cool. So if people want to find out more about like you, what you work on, what you've researched, how should they locate you? How should they find you?
I think mostly it will be through LinkedIn.
Mm.
Yeah, I think mostly like that's where you'll find me. I think like if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, I think I answer like 9 out of 10 times because I see my LinkedIn. I use my LinkedIn a lot. Like I just browse through. I think LinkedIn is like my second most used social media. I Yeah, people may not think of it as social media, but yes, I consider it
It
that way. I like
is.
just read
It
through.
is.
Yeah, I read through like everything going on in
Yeah.
people's lives or like the new things happening right now. So yeah, LinkedIn.
Okay. Yeah, we'll make sure to link your LinkedIn in our show notes and
Yes.
everything. But Aisha, like I've known you, but it was good to I haven't known the whole picture and the whole story.
I learned a
so
lot today.
It was really good.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's really good to just hear more of your story and how you got where you are, and hopefully, like, we have some listeners who are encouraged by what you do and where you've gone and what's out here for you in the future.
Yes.
Thank
Thank you
you so
so much for
much.
having me. This was
Yes,
so nice.
thank you so
Thank you.
much.
All right.